My name is Marissa Ross. I'm 38 years old, and I coordinate projects for a living in Seattle. This happened a few months ago, but some moments don't age. They stay sharp, like glass, under the skin. That Tuesday night, it was almost 11 o'clock p.m. I was still working in the spare room we'd turned into a home office, polishing slides that no one would remember my name for. Outside the window, the Seattle skyline glowed purple and tired, the way it does when the city pretends it's calm while hiding everything underneath. The house was quiet, until it wasn't. Laughter drifted in from the living room. Not polite laughter, not the kind you use at work when your boss tells a joke that isn't funny. This was real, soft, loose, the kind that relaxes your shoulders and slips out before you can stop it. I froze, because I hadn't heard my husband laugh like that with me in a very long time. And in that instant, something clicked so cleanly it felt like silence breaking. What had been missing between us hadn't vanished. It had simply been redirected. I closed my laptop slowly, like sudden movement might make the truth disappear, and stepped into the hallway. Our living room isn't special. 2 windows facing the street, a coffee table with a water stain we never fixed, an old blanket we argued about throwing away but never did. He was on the couch, phone tilted toward the lamp. And there, right on the table beside him, was his wedding ring. Not where he usually put it when lotion irritated his skin, just there, exposed, casual, like it didn't matter. I stood long enough to register the detail, filing it away with the others I'd been collecting without wanting to name them. The locked phone screens, the sudden passwords, the long showers after late work calls, the arguments over nothing, dishwashers, mail, tone, contempt dressed up as concern. The laughter floated again. I could hear a woman's voice through the speaker this time, too low to catch words, too intimate to be accidental. I didn't ask who it was. I went into the kitchen and let the water run longer than necessary, my hands steady, my chest strangely calm. When the call ended, he stared at his dark screen like he was waiting for it to light up again. Then he saw me and smiled. A practiced smile, careful, empty. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't jealous, I wasn't angry. I was done lying to myself. Because there's a kind of calm that comes after months of confusion, when the pattern finally reveals itself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. By the end of that week, my marriage would be over. Not with screaming, not with begging, but with a decision that refused to negotiate. I wasn't always the kind of woman who could stand in a hallway at 11 p.m. and feel calm while her marriage quietly bled out. For most of my life, I was the woman who tried to fix things before they broke. I'm Marissa Ross, 38, and my job is to keep chaos from becoming a disaster. I coordinate projects, deadlines, budgets, people with strong opinions, and weak follow-through. I've always been good at taking a messy room and turning it into a plan. I can smell risk before it becomes a crisis. I can hear what someone isn't saying. I can hold 10 moving pieces in my head and still make a grocery list on the way home. That skill has paid my mortgage. It also kept me in a marriage longer than it deserved. My husband's name is Ethan Ross. He's the kind of man who looks put together even when he's running late. Pressed shirts, clean haircut, shoes that never seem scuffed. The kind of man strangers trust instantly because his voice always sounds certain. When we first met, I thought his steadiness would be my peace. We met at a work fundraiser downtown, one of those Seattle events where everyone pretends it isn't networking because there's a charity banner behind the bar. My company was sponsoring a table. His company had sent him to represent. I remember the first thing he said to me wasn't flirty at all. "You look like you're counting exit routes." I blinked, half amused, half caught. "I am," I admitted. "It's a habit." He smiled, real, not rehearsed. "Good. Then you'll know exactly where to go when you get bored." It wasn't a line, it was awareness. Like he was actually seeing me. We spent most of that night talking near the edge of the room, away from the loudest people. He asked questions that didn't feel like small talk. I asked about his work, his family, his life in Seattle. He didn't oversell himself. He didn't try to impress me. He was warm in a way that made me feel safe. And after a string of dates with men who treated confidence like a performance, Ethan felt like a quiet room. I fell for that. The early years were easy in the way people mean when they say, "We just clicked." We built a routine without needing to fight for it. Saturday mornings were coffee runs. Our place had a window seat we claimed like it was ours. Sundays were grocery shopping and meal prep and laughing at the fact that we always bought too many limes. We took walks around Green Lake, hands shoved into pockets when the wind cut too hard. He'd nudge my shoulder and say, Project coordinator, can you schedule better weather? And I'd roll my eyes and smile because it felt like home. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. No crowd, no restaurant, just the two of us in our apartment kitchen, cooking pasta, music low, the world quiet. He turned off the stove, wiped his hands on a towel like he was nervous about leaving fingerprints on something important, and said, "Marissa, can we make this permanent?" Then he opened the small box. Simple ring, clean band, no giant stone, no show, because he knew me. I said yes with tears in my eyes, and he slipped it on my finger like he was placing something sacred, not flashy. And that night, we didn't talk about weddings or money or logistics. We just sat on the floor with our backs against the cabinets and kept staring at my hand like it was proof. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, close friends, immediate family. Nothing extravagant. Ethan's mother cried. My brother teased Ethan about joining the chaos. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the solid thing. This is the adult kind of love people search for. And for a while it was. But marriages don't collapse all at once. They erode. They wear down at the edges in ways you only notice when you look back and realize you've been living in a different version of your life for months. It started with tiny shifts, things I dismissed because I didn't want to be the kind of wife who reads betrayal into normal stress. Ethan became distracted. Not always. Not dramatically. Just enough that I began to feel like I was speaking to the side of his face instead of the whole of him. He used to meet me at the door when I got home, take my bag, kiss me without thinking. He used to ask what I wanted for dinner, like the question mattered. Then it became, "Hey," without looking up from his phone. Then, "Long day," like a statement, not an invitation. Then, "I already ate," even though we used to eat together, even if it was late. And whenever I tried to pull us back into each other, suggesting a jazz show, a weekend away, even just a walk, he'd agree, but with conditions. Not tonight. Maybe next week. Don't make plans without checking first. Checking first. That phrase landed strangely every time, like I needed permission to want him. What made it worse was that nothing was outright cruel. It was all subtle, easy to explain away. Work stress, fatigue, life. So I adjusted. I made breakfast when he forgot to eat. I picked up his favorite snacks. I gave him space when he acted like he needed it. I told myself marriages go through seasons. I told myself stability isn't supposed to feel exciting all the time. And because I'm good at building plans, I started building a plan in my head called Wait It Out. Then there was his family. Ethan's mother, Diane, has always been polished. The kind of woman who speaks softly but manages to make you feel corrected anyway. When Ethan and I were newly married, she'd call him constantly, little check-ins that somehow lasted 40 minutes. At holidays, she'd ask me questions that sounded innocent but carried judgment. "Are you still working those long hours, Marissa? Do you cook much, or is that not really your thing?" Ethan always liked to calm home. Calm home, like I was a storm passing through his life instead of his wife. Ethan never defended me, not explicitly, but he also never attacked me. He'd smile, change the subject, kiss my cheek like that was enough. And I let it be enough, because I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be the wife who made everything tense. Looking back, that's part of how betrayal grows. Not because you're stupid, because you're loyal, because you believe love should include patience. But patience becomes dangerous when it teaches the other person they can drift away without consequence. A few weeks before that Tuesday night, Ethan did something that should have been my first real alarm. He changed the shared Apple ID password we'd been using since we got engaged. No warning, just a notification on my phone saying I needed to sign in again. When I asked him about it, he didn't even look guilty. He said, "I'm cleaning up accounts. Security stuff. I coordinate projects for a living. I know what account cleanup looks like." This wasn't that. It was separation. Quiet, digital, deliberate. But I didn't confront it like a crisis. I asked once. He answered. I pretended it was fine. That's the thing about women like me. We don't explode early. We collect data. We file it away. We keep functioning until one night, one laugh that doesn't belong to you anymore, finally names the truth you've been avoiding. And by the time the truth has a name, it already has momentum. That's what Ethan didn't understand about me. He thought because I was reasonable, I would stay. He thought my calm meant softness. He thought the absence of yelling meant the absence of consequences. He didn't realize I'd been preparing for the moment my patience became a boundary. And on Maple Street, under that purple Seattle sky, with his ring on the coffee table like it was nothing, I finally stepped out of the version of myself that kept making excuses. Once the idea lodged itself in my mind that Ethan's attention hadn't disappeared, only changed direction, everything I'd been carefully ignoring began to reorganize itself, like puzzle pieces that finally admit what picture they belong to. The month leading up to that Tuesday night had been off. Not dramatic, not explosive, just wrong in a way that made the house feel slightly colder even when the heat was on. Ethan stopped looking at me when I talked. Not fully, not obviously. Just enough that I started trailing off mid-sentence, unsure whether I was being heard. His eyes would flick to his phone, his laptop, the television, anywhere but my face. And when I paused, waiting, he'd look up like he'd been pulled out of water. Sorry, what? He started guarding his phone the way people do when they don't want their thoughts overheard. Screen angled away, notifications silenced, calls taken in other rooms. And when I entered, laughter would cut short, not like guilt, more like inconvenience, as if my presence disrupted something smoother. Then came the long showers. He'd say he had a late work call, then disappear into the bathroom for 40 minutes, steam rolling under the door. When he came out, his shoulders would be looser, his mood lighter, like he'd been somewhere else entirely before returning to our shared space. I noticed how his laughter had changed. It wasn't that he laughed less with me. It was that he laughed differently without me. There's a certain sound people make when they're relaxed, when they don't feel observed or evaluated. I used to know that sound intimately. I could predict it, almost. Now I only heard it through walls. When I tried to address the distance directly, the response was always the same. A sigh. Not anger, not confusion. A sigh that suggested I was creating the problem by noticing it. Can we talk? I asked one night while we were brushing our teeth side by side. About what? He didn't look at me in the mirror. I feel like we've been disconnected. He rinsed his mouth, leaned over the sink and said, We're fine, Marissa. Work's just been intense. Fine. That word is the duct tape of dying marriages. It seals everything shut so nothing leaks, but it also prevents repair. Then there were the arguments, or what passed for them. They weren't loud, they were precise, surgical. I loaded the dishwasher wrong. I stacked the mail in the way. I asked questions at bad times. Each criticism came wrapped in concern, but carried something sharper underneath. Contempt disguised as efficiency. You don't have to micromanage everything, he said once, when all I'd done was ask if he remembered to pay the electricity bill. I stared at him, confused. I wasn't micromanaging, I was checking. Well, it feels like you don't trust me. That word, trust, appeared suddenly, like a shield raised too fast. I started noticing how often his schedule changed. Meetings ran late, calls moved, dinners canceled, plans adjusted. And while flexibility is part of adult life, respect is supposed to be part of marriage. I wasn't asking for control. I was asking to be included. When I tried to plan something intentional, a jazz show at a small club we used to love, tickets bought weeks in advance, he agreed, then backed out the day of. I'm exhausted. When I suggested the botanical gardens after the weather cleared, he said, Don't make plans without checking. As if wanting time together was a logistical error. What unsettled me most was how his family's tone began to shift. Diane started calling more. Not me. Him. And when I was in the room, she'd lower her voice or ask pointed questions that landed like evaluations. Is Marissa still working those long hours? She always was very independent. Independent. Another word that sounds like praise until it's used as distance. Once, after a family dinner, Ethan told me his mother thought I seemed preoccupied. I laughed. I work. That's not new. He shrugged. She just worries. About him. Never about us. And I began to sense it, his life splitting into lanes. One lane where I existed as a role. Wife, logistics partner, stable background. Another lane where he was lighter, freer, more himself. The scariest part? He didn't seem to think I noticed. Or maybe he thought I wouldn't act. Because I didn't confront him aggressively. I didn't accuse. I didn't search his phone or demand explanations. I watched. I listened. I noticed patterns, like how his laughter would stop when I entered a room, then resume when I walked down the hall, as if someone had hit pause, then play again. Like how he wore a specific blue scarf to bed on nights he claimed he was cold, only those nights. Like how his wedding ring started appearing on surfaces more often than on his hand. 3 nights in a row. The same spot. The coffee table. None of it was criminal. None of it was proof. But together, they were coordinates. and they were pointing somewhere I didn't want to go. I started preparing, not dramatically, not consciously, just professionally. I checked bank statements, quietly. I updated my emergency contact at work, casually. I took photos of small, ordinary things, not to accuse him, but to confirm my own memory, to know I wasn't imagining the shifts. The ring on the table, the scarf on the chair, the timestamps that didn't align. I didn't feel like a detective. I felt like a woman making sure she wasn't gaslighting herself. The last Saturday we spent together, really together, at least in structure, should have been comforting. Coffee, groceries, a walk around the lake. We talked about errands, to-do lists, schedules. An entire day passed without a single moment of real eye contact. That's not how couples avoid each other when they're angry. That's how they forget they're allowed to look. By the time that Tuesday night arrived, the conflict hadn't started. It had already been living with us, quiet, uninvited, and fed by my willingness to wait. The laughter in the living room didn't create the fracture. It revealed it. And once revealed, I knew something irreversible was coming. Because I'm not someone who chases answers that don't want to be given. And when you pull a thread and the whole sweater starts to unravel, you don't blame the thread. You accept that the fabric was already finished. That Tuesday night didn't explode. It clarified. I was standing at the kitchen sink, water running over a glass I didn't actually need to clean, when Ethan shifted on the couch. I heard the faint scrape of fabric, the subtle change in breathing that comes right after a call ends, when someone doesn't want the silence to arrive too fast. I didn't turn around right away. I let the moment settle, let my body register what my mind had already accepted. When I finally faced the living room, he was sitting there staring at his phone like it might light up again if he believed hard enough. The lamp beside him cast a warm glow over the coffee table, and that's when the ring caught the light. His wedding ring. Not shining, not placed with intention. Just there. Something in me slowed down, not heartbreak, focus. He looked up and smiled when he noticed me, the same polite, careful smile he'd been practicing lately. It didn't reach his eyes. It never did anymore. I dried the glass and set it down, deliberately, next to the dish towel. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. There's a specific kind of peace that arrives after prolonged chaos, when your mind finally stops negotiating with the truth. He shifted slightly, then reached for his hand, hesitated, and tucked it under his leg instead of putting the ring back on. I noticed everything. Not with judgment, with inventory. He started filling the silence before I could. Long day, he said lightly. Work's been insane. Of course it had. I walked toward the coffee table and picked up the ring. It was warm from the lamp, simple band, no engraving. We'd chosen that style together because we liked how clean it looked, how honest. I placed it carefully onto the small ceramic dish from our anniversary trip to New Mexico, the one with the glaze that looked like rain falling on desert clay. I straightened the dish out of habit, aligning it with the edge of the table. He watched me, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Are you going to say anything?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked. Not at the man I married, not at the version of him I kept hoping would return, but at the man sitting in front of me now, someone making choices quietly and hoping I'd stay convenient. "Good news," I said, my voice even. "By the end of the week, you'll be free to call her your partner." The color drained from his face so fast it startled even me. His phone, which had been glued to his hand for months, suddenly looked heavy. He reached for the ring, then pulled back like it had burned him. "That's not funny," he said. The words came out thin, stretched. He glanced from the dish to the ring to my face, like he was trying to decide which problem to fix first. "It was a work call," he said quickly, the story assembling itself as he spoke. "She's in London, different time zone. We were just unwinding after a presentation." The rhythm was familiar. Confident opening, casual explanation, soft landing. I let it pass through me like traffic I had no intention of merging into. "You can't say things like that," he continued. "It's extreme. You're upset." I rested my hands on the back of the dining chair and studied the wood grain like it might offer advice. Outside, a car door slammed. Someone laughed on the street. Normal sounds that made the room feel sharper. "Ethan," he said, using my name like a key, "you're reading into something that isn't there." I tilted my head toward the table. "There's enough here." I didn't raise my voice. That's when offense kicked in, right on schedule. "So you're throwing away our marriage over a phone call?" His chin lifted. "Do you hear yourself?" "You already did," I said, not as an attack, as a measurement. He stood abruptly, the blanket sliding to the floor. "What does that even mean?" The question wasn't curiosity, it was instruction. "Translate my choice into your fault so I can breathe again." Did someone put this in your head? He asked, switching tactics. Your brother? Your friends? Is this some kind of boundary trend? I pulled out the chair and sat, not to argue, but to stay grounded. It is a boundary, I said. Mine. He laughed, sharp and humorless. You're being paranoid. That wasn't flirting. It was work. The laughing was nerves. I've been under pressure, and you haven't exactly... He stopped himself. Too late. I'd heard fragments of that template for months. Tonight, it arrived fully assembled. I stood and walked toward the office, not fast, just changing rooms. He followed a few steps behind, hovering in the doorway like he needed permission to enter. I didn't offer it. I opened my laptop without turning it on, straightened papers, aligned a notebook with the desk edge, clicked a pen open, then closed it. My hands needed something to do, besides catch the story he kept throwing at me. Marissa, look at me. I did. His shoulders softened. The old tactic. We've both been off. We can reset. Take a weekend away. No phones. I'll put the ring back on if that's what this is about. He reached toward the doorway, like he could touch the dish from there and rewrite the last month with a gesture. This isn't about a weekend, I said. Then talk to me, he pleaded. Say what you want me to say. There it was. Performance instead of truth. I wrote a single word on my notepad just to hear the scratch of the pen. Boundaries. Then I drew a line under it. I'm trying here, he said, voice fraying. I don't know what you want. I want alignment, I said calmly, between how we live and what we call this. Silence pressed in. He stepped into the office and leaned against the bookshelf, touching a travel guide we hadn't opened in years. I don't know who you're turning into, he said. You used to be reasonable. I still am, I replied. I'm just finished pretending. That sentence landed harder than anything else. His face changed, and in that moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the end of negotiations. After the word pretending landed between us, something in Ethan shifted, not into remorse, but into calculation. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes searched my face for the version of me he used to manage. The woman who softened when things got tense, the woman who explained herself until his discomfort felt justified. She wasn't there anymore. You're not even angry, he said quietly. And for the first time that night, fear slipped into his voice. That's worse. I felt it too, the strange absence of heat. No shaking hands, no urge to scream, just a clean, alert stillness. Like my body had finally stopped bracing for impact. I don't need to be angry to be done, I said. He tried again, switching lanes the way he always did when one approach failed. Okay, then let's be adults, he said, forcing steadiness. Therapy, a plan. We write things down. We fix what needs fixing. The word plan lit his eyes. He knew planning was my language. He'd watched me rescue projects on the brink of collapse with timelines and bullet points. I looked at him and felt a quiet sadness. Not for what we were losing, but for how late he was offering this. It was fixable, I said, before contempt moved in. He blinked. Contempt? The word hung there, diagnostic and final. That's dramatic, he said quickly. I've been stressed. I've been carrying a lot. I turned my notepad toward myself and drew 2 columns. What I control, what I don't. Under the first, I wrote my time, my money, my attention, my name. Under the second, your story, your audience, your choices. You're humiliating me, he said suddenly, in our own home. I'm not calling anyone, I replied. I'm not posting anything. I'm telling the truth at normal volume. He scoffed. God, you sound like you're running a meeting. The insult was familiar, safe, small. His phone lit up in the hallway. We both looked toward it. He didn't move. I need air, he announced, narrating the exit like it made him noble. He pulled on boots without socks and stepped onto the porch. Cold air rushed in before the door clicked shut. I stayed at the desk, eyes resting on the word boundaries. The ink had bled slightly into the paper, making the line thicker than the pen should allow. Through the window, I could see his silhouette, shoulders hunched, phone raised, the posture of someone crafting a message they hope will rearrange reality. When he came back inside, he moved slower. Okay, he said, setting his phone face down with care. If you're serious, if this isn't a performance, then tell me what you're going to do. It wasn't a question, it was a dare. I'm going to be consistent, I said. He waited. Nothing came. Consistent how? He pushed. With punishing me for existing? Policing my conversations? Do you want me to quit my job? You're very busy writing my lines, I said. The mask slipped, not off, but sideways. Panic flashed beneath the charm. He stepped closer. Too close. The old move. Touch the elbow. Soften the eyes. Reset the chemistry. I took a half step back. You're not even angry, he whispered again. I know, I said. He tried one last warning. If you walk down this road, there's no coming back. I know. That was it. He went to the bedroom and closed the door quietly, like loudness would leave evidence. I didn't sleep, not from anger, but from clarity. The clean alertness that arrives when a decision locks into place. At 11:47 p.m., I drafted an email to a law firm I'd bookmarked months ago without admitting why. Efficient, quiet, no theatrics. Married 8 years, no children, joint property. Seeking a clean separation with clear boundaries. I read it once to check the tone. Calm, adult, done. Then I opened the bank portal. I didn't empty anything. I didn't punish. I separated. Savings moved to an account I'd opened last quarter for emergencies. This qualified. Overdraft protection turned off. Authorized user removed from my primary card. A reasonable daily limit set on the joint account. The money was still there. It just required a conversation we weren't having at midnight. Passwords followed. Two-factor authentication. Email. Cloud storage. Calendars. Not to control him. To stop sharing a life he'd already left. I made tea. Drank half. Deleted a grocery list titled Thanksgiving 2022 because it had lived on our screen too long and said nothing about who we were now. At 6:05 a.m., my phone buzzed. Consultation available Thursday at 9:30. I typed why. By the time Ethan came into the kitchen in his robe, pale around the mouth, I was making eggs. We need to talk at lunch, he said carefully. Thursday at 9:30, I replied. I have a lawyer. The word didn't explode. It's settled. And from that moment on, everything I did wasn't emotional. It was intentional. Because when a woman stops reacting and starts acting, the story has already changed. The moment the word lawyer entered the air between us, Ethan stopped trying to sound reasonable and started trying to sound wronged. That shift happened quietly, but it was unmistakable. By mid-morning, his confusion had hardened into indignation. You already decided all this without me? He asked, standing in the kitchen while his coffee sat untouched in the mug. The machine blinked uselessly at him. I'd changed the Wi-Fi password overnight. The silence between us buzzed louder than the appliance ever had. I decided what I'm responsible for, I said. Not what you do. He exhaled sharply through his nose. This is punitive. It's proportional. He didn't like that answer. I could tell because he stopped engaging with me directly and started reaching for witnesses. At noon, I heard his voice in the bedroom, low, careful, pitched to invite sympathy. He's acting like a stranger, he said. A pause. No, I don't know where this is coming from. Another pause, longer. Yes, I'm scared. He didn't mention the ring on the table. He didn't mention the laughter that wasn't meant for me. By the afternoon, his mother had joined the narrative. Diane called. I didn't answer. She texted instead. We need to talk. Marriage is not something you walk away from when things get uncomfortable. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down. That message wasn't concern. It was pressure, wrapped in morality. When Ethan brought it up later, his tone had changed again. Sharper now, defensive. My mom thinks you're overreacting, he said. She thinks you've always been too rigid. I looked at him. Then she hasn't been listening. She's worried about me, he snapped, about how sudden this is. It's sudden to you, I said evenly, not to me. That's when the accusations began. You've been cold lately. You stopped trying. You made work your whole personality. Each one was a reframing, an attempt to shift the timeline so his choices looked like reactions instead of initiations. I didn't argue. I watched. Because escalation doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like people gathering around the wrong story and nodding along because it's easier than asking better questions. By evening, the evidence multiplied, not new facts, just clearer ones. His phone stayed dark longer than usual. When it finally lit up, I saw the reflection in the window, a long message bubble, then nothing. 2 hours passed. He checked again, and again. The woman he'd been laughing with didn't show up for the hard part. That realization hit him sideways. He paced. He snapped. He accused me of financial manipulation when his card declined at lunch, an alert my phone received at 12:13. Did you do something to the account? He asked, trying for calm. I made our spending honest, I replied. Mine is mine. The joint is for joint. His voice rose. You're trying to control me. No, I said. I'm refusing to subsidize choices I didn't make. That's when his friends entered the story. Texts, calls, opinions. One of them framed it as men being punished for emotional missteps. Another called me calculating. One asked quietly, why was your ring off? That question cracked the room open. Ethan went still. He didn't answer it. He couldn't. That night he tried charm again. Dinner, soft lighting, the sweater I'd bought him years ago on our New Mexico trip. He stood close, too close, like proximity could undo paperwork. "You're being cruel," he said softly. "I'm being precise." Later, he tried heat, sitting next to me on the couch, hand on my forearm, voice low. "We could still fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, "only naming and acting." The next morning, the fallout accelerated. The woman he'd leaned on for laughter pulled back when reality knocked. Her messages slowed, then stopped. The fantasy collapsed under logistics. And as it did, the people around Ethan began asking fuller questions. Not, "Why are you leaving him?" but "What exactly happened?" By Thursday morning, the story he'd been telling no longer held. And he could feel it. So could I. Because escalation isn't just pressure from the outside. It's the moment the truth starts pushing back harder than the lie. And that pressure was about to break something open. For both of us. The night before my consultation with the lawyer was the quietest the house had ever been. Not peaceful, vacant. Ethan went to bed early, retreating behind the bedroom door, like silence might erase the week. I stayed on the couch with the old blanket pulled up to my shoulders, the one that still smelled faintly of laundry soap and cedar. The television was off. My phone was face down. I wasn't avoiding noise. I was listening for myself. When everything stops, no arguments, no explanations, no witnesses, you finally hear the part of you that's been talking quietly for months, the part that kept saying this isn't what love feels like anymore and getting shushed by hope. That voice was loud now. I stared at the coffee table where the ceramic dish still sat. The ring hadn't moved. Days had passed, and neither of us had touched it. It existed outside the story, no longer a symbol, not yet a relic. My chest ached then, not with jealousy, but with grief. Not grief for the marriage as it was. Grief for the version of myself who believed patience alone could save something that required honesty from two people. I thought about the years we'd spent building routines that looked like stability from the outside. The grocery lists, the shared calendars, the casual we that had slowly stopped meaning us. I wondered briefly if I had missed something obvious, if I'd stayed too calm, if my steadiness had taught him I would absorb anything. That's the danger zone. The moment when a woman mistakes self-reflection for self-blame. I caught myself there, standing on that edge, and forced my breath to slow. I put a hand on my sternum, felt the steady rhythm underneath. I wasn't wrong for expecting respect. I wasn't dramatic for noticing absence. I wasn't cruel for choosing clarity over comfort. Still, the loneliness came. Not cinematic, not tearful. Just a hollow quiet where partnership used to sit. At some point after midnight, Ethan came out of the bedroom. He stood in the doorway like he didn't know which life he belonged to anymore. "I don't want to be alone," he said. No anger, no posture, just truth stripped of strategy. For a moment, I felt something soften in me, not enough to turn back, but enough to hurt. "You won't be," I said gently. "You have friends, you have work, you have yourself." He looked at me like I'd misunderstood him. Maybe I had. Maybe what he meant was, I don't want to lose the version of myself that existed because you were here. But that version had been leaning on me to hold it upright while it drifted elsewhere. And I couldn't do that anymore. He went back to the bedroom without another word. I didn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because my mind was unusually clear. The kind of clarity that doesn't need distraction. I opened my notepad and turned the columns into action items. Mail forwarding. Short-term housing. Insurance questions. Change of address. No speeches, no rehearsals. Just process. In the early morning, the house made its usual sounds. Pipes, distant traffic, the refrigerator cycling on. Ordinary noises that felt newly honest without the weight of pretending layered on top. That was the darkest moment. Not the confrontation, not the accusations, not even the betrayal. It was the realization that love can end without fireworks and still be final, and that choosing yourself doesn't feel triumphant at first. It feels quiet, heavy, lonely in a way that asks whether you're strong enough to sit with it without running back to what's familiar. I was, but strength doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It just means I didn't turn that hurt into another excuse. By the time the sun rose thin and pale over Seattle, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. Thursday didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with structure. Thin winter light slid across the kitchen counters while I packed a small duffel. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, running shoes, toiletries. Not an escape bag, a transition bag. I set it by the door where it could be seen, because visibility prevents confusion. Ethan watched from the hallway, silent. His face held that unsettled look people wear when they realize the script has moved on without them. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, I sat at the desk and took the call. Attorney Kay Walsh was exactly what I needed. Measured, precise, uninterested in theatrics. She asked questions that didn't flinch from numbers or timelines. She didn't try to soothe me or inflame me. She mapped reality. 8 years married, no children, joint property, clear financial separation already in motion. When she asked for my primary concern, I didn't hesitate. Respect, I said. It can't be negotiated. There was a pause, not for sympathy, but for notation. Understood, she replied. When the call ended, something locked into place inside me. Not relief. Alignment. The feeling of a door closing cleanly instead of slamming. I sent a short follow-up email summarizing priorities and next steps. Bullet points. Dates. No emotion. I signed and set my phone face down like a period at the end of a sentence. That's when Ethan tried again, without armor. He stood in the office doorway, barefoot, hands empty. I could fix this, he said, if you told me how. There was no pride left in the sentence, no posture, just a man asking for a map after ignoring every signpost. I turned to face him fully. Start by telling the truth to yourself, I said, at normal volume. He closed his eyes like the words were wind against his face. That was the turning point. Not because of new evidence, but because the old evidence finally held weight. The ring still untouched. The laughter that vanished when reality showed up. The woman who retreated when logistics arrived. The friends who stopped nodding and started asking questions. None of it needed interpretation anymore. I wasn't guessing. I was choosing. I'm going to be out tomorrow, I added calmly. The rest can be handled with signatures. He didn't argue. He couldn't. That night, I packed in silence. Labeled boxes by room and weight, because that's how you avoid injury. I left the things that were his in every way that mattered. I took what was mine, not out of spite, but accuracy. Before I zipped the bag, I looked once more at the ceramic dish. The ring sat exactly where I'd placed it days ago. Out of story. At the door, he tried one last time, not with charm or heat, but with truth stripped bare. I don't want to be alone. I felt the ache, clean and sharp. You won't be, I said gently, but I can't be the furniture that keeps the room from echoing. I turned the knob and walked out, not because I was angry, but because I finally knew where I stood. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet, orderly, unavoidable. Friday morning started with weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Pale sun on cold sidewalks. The kind of light that makes everything look honest. I loaded the last box into my car and locked the door behind me, leaving the key on the small hook by the thermostat where we'd always kept it. No note. The house already knew. I drove to a short-term apartment near Green Lake. 2 rooms, neutral walls, a view of parking lots, and a strip of water in the distance. Month-to-month lease, temporary address, permanent decision. I unpacked the way I work. Order first, polish later. Clothes in the closet. Toiletries lined up. 1 skillet in a drawer that didn't quite fit. I placed my notepad on the counter and wrote a list I could finish in a day. Utilities, forwarding, renter's insurance, address change, and crossed items off as I completed them. Completion is oxygen. Ethan's texts arrived in clusters. We need to talk. Please call me. I'll change my number. I'll quit that account. We can start fresh. I'm scared. I replied once, because clarity is cleaner in writing. All future communication through counsel. He read it, typed, stopped, typed again, then sent a single period, like the end of a sentence he didn't want to finish. The story he'd been telling began to collapse under its own weight. Friends stopped nodding and started asking questions that required facts, not feelings. His mother called again, this time not with instructions, but with concern that sounded thinner than before. The woman he'd been laughing with didn't step into the daylight. She never intended to. When fantasy meets paperwork, some people remember their boundaries. The house, relieved of pretending, went quiet in a way that sounded like respect. Draft language arrived from Walsh's office. Temporary orders, property handling, timelines. I read it twice, corrected nothing, signed. The document felt like a building permit. Permission to construct a life that matched the blueprint I'd been sketching every time the old one bent into shapes it couldn't hold. At 12:13 p.m., my phone buzzed. Bank alert. Joint card daily limit reached. A minute later, a message from Ethan. Did something happen to the visa? I replied, we're separating the utilities of our lives. No argument followed. By evening, his reputation wasn't in ruins, but it wasn't intact either, not because I said anything. Because silence invites accuracy. People compare notes, timelines align, small omissions become obvious. The fallout wasn't cruel. It was clean. No scenes, no public shaming, no victory lap, just gravity doing what gravity does. I cooked a simple dinner and ate it, standing at the counter, windows open to let the cold in. The air smelled like water and winter. My phone stayed face down. For the first time in a long while, nothing was pulling at me. The first night alone didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet. The apartment hummed softly. The refrigerator, the distant traffic, the sound of someone else's footsteps in a hallway that had nothing to do with me. I stood at the small window and watched the reflection of my own face in the glass, older than the woman who'd walked down the aisle 8 years ago, steadier than the woman who'd waited too long for answers. I didn't miss the arguments. I didn't miss the uncertainty. What I missed, briefly, was the idea of being chosen without having to ask. But ideas aren't lives. I slept deeply that night, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was being negotiated anymore. The following days settled into a rhythm that belonged entirely to me. Morning runs around Green Lake. Coffee made exactly how I like it. Emails that ended with my name alone. No explanations required. No tone management. No shrinking. Ethan didn't disappear. He didn't become a villain. He became a man living with the consequences of choices he'd hoped would stay abstract. His life didn't collapse, but it recalibrated without me buffering the impact. And I didn't feel the urge to watch. Healing, I learned, isn't about winning. It's about reclaiming attention. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, stopped wondering what I could have said differently, stopped measuring my worth by someone else's distraction. Because the truth is this: love doesn't leave you guessing in the dark. Respect doesn't require surveillance. And boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're clarity, expressed as before resentment rots everything it touches. I didn't end my marriage with rage. I ended it with alignment. And that changed everything. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you're overthinking, whether you're being too much, whether patience will eventually be rewarded, ask yourself one question. Are you being chosen or are you being managed? Because the moment you stop negotiating your dignity, the story changes, quietly, decisively, and forever. And sometimes the most powerful ending isn't loud. It's peaceful.